The burning of the Hylas system began with a clerical error that cost 4 billion lives. The subsector Astropathic Choir had screamed warnings of a warp breach for 3 weeks. Those warnings sat in a stack of parchment on a low-level administrator's desk in the planetary capital. The ink was still wet when the sky broke open. Void shields over the primary Hive City flickered and died. The orbital defense platforms turned their guns toward the rift, but they were too slow. Gravity inverted. Tides rose to swallow continents. The people of Hylas Prime looked up and waited for the diamonds of the Imperium to descend and consume their souls. They prayed to the God Emperor for salvation. They expected silence. Instead, they got a sonic boom that shattered every window in the upper spire. A single figure descended from the burning clouds. He did not drop like a drop pod or a Thunderhawk gunship. He floated. He wore a suit of synthetic weave in blue and red, colors that did not match any known Astartes chapter or Imperial Guard regiment. A cape fluttered behind him, untouched by the atmospheric re-entry heat. He stopped in mid-air above the panic of the central plaza. A falling debris chunk the size of a hab block plummeted toward a crowd of 10,000 refugees. The figure did not brace himself. He simply flew upward. He collided with the debris. There was a crack of impact that sounded like a Titan war horn. The stone block disintegrated into dust. The man hovered there, suspended by no visible engine, his eyes glowing with red witch fire. The crowd went silent. The administratum scribes and ecclesiarchy priests froze. In the grim darkness of the far future, miracles were usually traps set by dark gods. But the people were desperate. One woman fell to her knees, then 10, then the entire plaza. They cried out that a living saint had arrived. They wept with relief. The man in the blue suit looked down at them. He did not chant a catechism of hate against the alien. He did not salute the Aquila. He smiled. It was a bright, perfect smile that did not reach his eyes. He floated lower, basking in the sound of their weeping. He liked the sound. He needed the sound. This was the first strategic error of the Hylas sector defense. The planetary governor assumed this being was a weapon sent by Terra. He cancelled the Exterminatus order. He ordered the PDF forces to stand down and welcome the savior. This delay allowed the warp rift to widen. It allowed the corruption to take root, not in the soil, but in the ego of the newcomer. The entity was not a demon, and he was not a man. He was a biological weapon from a forgotten time or a different reality displaced by the storms of the warp. He possessed the physical strength of a primar, but the emotional maturity of a petulant child. He heard the prayers. He thought they were for him. Imperial logic dictates that power requires control. Psychers are sanctioned. Astartes are indoctrinated. This being had no doctrine. He had only a hunger for validation. When a servo skull floated too close to his face, he did not analyze it. He felt annoyed. His eyes flashed red. Twin beams of thermal energy, hotter than a melter gun, sliced the drone in half. The crowd gasped. The man's smile twitched. He looked at the fearful faces. He did not see subjects of the Emperor. He saw an audience that had stopped clapping. The shift in the air was subtle. The smell of ozone mixed with the smell of wet fear. Far above, the warp storm pulsed, sensing a soul that was infinitely powerful and infinitely empty. The Chaos Gods do not always need to break down the gates. Sometimes they just wait for someone to knock. The man in the cape hovered over the city he had just saved, and for the first time, he wondered why they weren't cheering louder. The silence offended him, and in the 41st millennium, offense is a capital crime. Governor Morrow stood on the plasteel balcony of the governor's palace and watched the smoke rise. The fires in the lower hives of Hylas Prime were burning themselves out. The immediate panic of the warp rift had subsided, replaced by a stunned, heavy silence that covered the mega city. Moros was a man of administration, not war. He wore robes of heavy velvet that smelled of incense and old fear. He adjusted his collar. He looked at the figure floating 10 meters away from the railing. The man in the blue suit had not touched the ground for 3 hours. He hovered with his arms crossed. His cape defied the natural wind currents of the upper spire. Moros had served the Imperium for 60 years. He had seen Astartes giants. He had seen the horrors of mutant uprisings. He had never seen a human fly without a jump pack. The governor cleared his throat. He signaled to his scribe, a hunched man with a bionic eye that whirred softly. The scribe stepped forward with a data slate. Moros needed to establish protocol. If this was a living saint, the ecclesiarchy needed to be notified. If this was a mutant, the governor should have ordered the palace guards to open fire. But the governor was a coward. He had seen the man vaporize a falling hab block with his eyes. Moros chose survival. He bowed low. He kept his head down. He waited for the entity to speak. The entity did not speak. The entity looked at the horizon where the sun was setting through the smog. The man looked bored. Homelander floated there and tried to process the data his super senses were feeding him. The air tasted like sulfur and rot. The city below was a nightmare of Gothic stone and rusted iron. There were no billboards. There were no neon signs advertising Vought products. There were no news helicopters circling him. He could hear millions of heartbeats, but they were all racing with terror. He heard prayers, but they were chanting a name he did not know. They whispered about the Emperor. They whispered about the Golden Throne. They did not whisper his name. It annoyed him. He had saved them. He had caught the debris. He had lasered the drones. Where were the cameras? Where was the applause? He drifted closer to the balcony. His boots touched the stone with a soft tap. Moros flinched. The governor fell to his knees. The scribe dropped the data slate. It clattered loudly. Homelander looked at the scribe with disdain. The scribe was missing half his face, replaced by crude metal implants. Homelander grimaced. He hated looking at deformed things. It reminded him of failure. He looked at Moros. He put on his public smile. It was the smile he used for talk shows. It was tight and practiced. He asked to speak to the person in charge. He spoke in a flat American accent that sounded jarringly casual against the high Gothic architecture. Moros did not understand the dialect at first. He looked up, confused. Homelander's eyes narrowed. The heat in the air spiked. Moros quickly switched to Low Gothic. He stammered that he was the planetary governor. He offered his life to the saint. Homelander laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound. He told the governor to get up. He said he did not want his life. He wanted a debrief. He wanted to know which network was broadcasting this. He wanted to know why the city looked like a sewer. Moros stood up on shaky legs. He did not understand the word network. He explained that the astropaths were transmitting news of the miracle to the subsector capital. Homelander asked what an astropath was. Moros gestured to the spire behind them. He led Homelander inside. The interior of the palace was dark. The lighting came from flickering electro candles and glow globes. Shadows stretched long across the hallways. Skulls were carved into every archway. Homelander walked with his hands on his hips. He felt the heavy atmosphere pressing on him. It felt like a funeral home. They entered the astropathic chamber. The smell hit Homelander first. It was the smell of ozone, burnt meat, and madness. In the center of the room, 3 emaciated figures were strapped to brass chairs. Their eyes were sewn shut. Wires ran from their skulls into a central cogitator bank. They were screaming silently, their mouths open in rictus grins. Homelander stepped back, his face twisted in disgust. He asked what was wrong with them. Moros explained they were sending the message through the warp. They were singing the glory of the Saint's arrival. Homelander looked at the blind, tortured psychics. This was his press team. This was how the world would know about him. He felt a cold knot of rage in his stomach. He was the greatest hero on Earth. He was the only man in the sky, and his heralds were tortured cripples in a dungeon. He turned to Moros. He demanded food. He demanded a clean room. He demanded to see a map. He needed to know where the United States was. He needed to go home. Moros hurried to obey. He ordered the servants to prepare the feast hall. The servants were servitors. They were lobotomized humans with metal limbs. One of them had a platter fused to its hand. It shuffled forward with a plate of protein mash and re-sick water. Homelander looked at the grey sludge. He looked at the drooling cyborg serving it. He slapped the platter away. It hit the wall and exploded in a spray of grey paste. The servitor did not react. It simply stood there, awaiting new orders. Homelander grabbed Moros by the velvet collar. He lifted the governor 1 foot off the ground. He asked if this was a joke. He asked if Vought put them up to this. Moros could not breathe. He clawed at the hand holding him. He gasped that this was the best ration available. The planet was under blockade. The supply lines were cut by the warp storms. This was what the nobility ate. The commoners ate corpse starch. Homelander stared into the governor's terrified eyes. He saw the truth there. There was no prank. This was real. He was in a hellhole. He dropped Moros. The governor collapsed, gasping for air. Homelander walked to the window. He looked out at the Hive City. It stretched for miles, a cancerous growth of metal and stone. He realized with a dawning horror that he was not on Earth. The stars were wrong. The moon was wrong. He was alone. Strategic analysis of the Hyla system indicates that isolation breeds desperation. The governor needed a weapon. The system was beset by raiders. A splinter fleet of Ork freebooters had been testing the asteroid belt defenses. A cult of the ruinous powers had infiltrated the lower Hab blocks. The governor's own PDF regiments were under-equipped and suffering from low morale. Moros watched the flying man pace around the room. He saw the raw power. He saw the temper. He saw a weapon that did not need ammunition. He formulated a plan. He would treat this man not as a soldier, but as a god. The Imperium understands faith. If he could direct this entity's anger, he could save his planet. The first test came at dawn. The planetary Vox grid lit up with alarms. A raid was incoming. It was not the Orks. It was a localized insurrection. The cult of the flayed hand had decided that the warp rift was a sign to rise. 10,000 armed cultists stormed the District 9 power manufactorum. They seized the reactor control room. They threatened to overload the core if the governor did not surrender the city to the glory of chaos. The PDF commander advised a siege. It would take days. Thousands of civilians would die in the crossfire. The reactor might blow anyway. Moros went to Homelander's quarters. The entity was sitting on a stone bench, staring at a blank wall. He had not slept. He did not need to sleep, but he missed the comfort of a bed. Moros told him there were bad men hurting people. He used simple words. He told him they were terrorists. Homelander's head snapped up. Terrorists. That was a word he understood. That was a script he knew. He stood up. He smoothed his cape. He asked where they were. Moros pointed to the smoke rising from District 9. Homelander flew out of the palace window. The sonic boom shattered the stained glass of the governor's private chapel. Moros did not care. He watched the blue streak cross the sky. It took a Valkyrie gunship 20 minutes to reach District 9. It took Homelander 30 seconds. He arrived above the Manufactorum. It was a massive industrial complex, a maze of pipes and cooling towers. The cultists had set up heavy bolter nests on the roofs. They saw the flying man. They opened fire. The heavy caliber rounds struck Homelander's chest. They bounced off harmlessly. He did not even flinch. He looked at the cultists. They were wearing rags and skins. They had carved 8 pointed stars into their flesh. They looked ugly. They looked like villains. This was easy. This was clean. Homelander's eyes glowed red. He swept his gaze across the rooftop. The laser beams cut through the cultists, the heavy bolters and the plasteel roof. Bodies were severed in half. Ammunition crates cooked off. The cultists screamed. It was a different sound than the screaming of the astropaths. This was the sound of enemies dying. Homelander enjoyed it. He flew down through the hole he had made in the roof. He landed in the main reactor chamber. There were 50 cultists inside. They were holding hostages, workers from the plant. The cult leader was a massive man with a chain axe. He shouted a challenge to the false god. He revved his weapon. Homelander did not listen to the speech. He walked forward. The cultists fired laser guns. The beams of light struck his suit and dissipated. Homelander grabbed the nearest cultist by the head. He squeezed. The skull collapsed like wet cardboard. The hostages screamed. Homelander looked at them. He told them it was okay. He was here. The cult leader charged. He swung the chain axe at Homelander's neck. The adamantite teeth of the weapon ground against Homelander's skin. Sparks flew. The motor stalled. The axe blade shattered. Homelander looked bored. He backhanded the leader. The blow was casual, but it carried the force of a thunderhammer. The cult leader flew across the room. He hit the main control console. His body turned to paste on impact. The console sparked and exploded. This was a critical error. The console controlled the coolant flow to the reactor. Alarms began to wail. Red lights flashed. The machine spirit of the reactor woke up in a fury. The temperature began to climb. The hostages panicked. They ran for the exits. Homelander stood there. He did not understand the flashing lights. He did not know how to operate a cogitator. He looked at the broken console. He had just punched the bad guy. The movie was supposed to end. Why were the alarms still going? He flew up and out of the building. He hovered above the Manufactorum. He watched as the reactor went critical. The explosion was contained by the reinforced structure, but the shockwave flattened the surrounding HAB blocks. A mushroom cloud of radioactive steam rose into the air. The district went dark. Power was lost to 40% of the Hive City. Life support systems in the lower levels failed. The air recyclers stopped. Homelander floated in the smoke. He had killed the terrorists. He had won. He waited for the governor to thank him. He did not think about the power outage. He did not think about the radiation. He flew back to the palace. When he landed, Moros was pale. The governor had reports of the blackout. Millions were without heat. The lower levels would freeze within a day. But Moros looked at Homelander's pristine suit. He looked at the red eyes that dared him to criticize. Moros swallowed his report. He ordered the bells of the cathedral to ring. He declared a victory. He told the people that the saint had purged the heretics. The blackout was a test of their faith. Homelander accepted the praise. He stood on the balcony again. He waved to the crowd that gathered in the plaza below. They were cold. They were hungry. But they cheered. They cheered because they had no other choice. They cheered because the alternative was the darkness. Homelander fed on the noise. It filled the hole in his ego, but it was not enough. The adoration felt desperate. It lacked the flavor of genuine love. It felt like payment. 3 days passed. The reality of the Imperium began to grind on Homelander. There was no internet. There was no television. The entertainment was limited to holographic operas about martyrs dying for the Emperor. Homelander tried to watch one. He found it boring. He wanted to see himself. He asked Moros to build a statue. Moros agreed immediately. He diverted stonemasons from repairing the defensive walls to carve a statue of Homelander in the central square. The strategic situation worsened. The Ork freebooters in the asteroid belt noticed the energy spike from Homelander's arrival. Orks are drawn to power. They are drawn to the biggest fight. The war boss, a brute named Skartorv, gathered his fleet. He wanted to stomp the flying blue boy. The sensors on Hylas Prime detected the Ork ships moving inward. At the same time, the wider Imperium took notice. The astropathic message had reached the subsector capital. It had been garbled by the warp storm, but the keywords were clear. Living saint, flying, invulnerable. The Inquisition monitors picked it up. Inquisitor Kalen of the Ordo Hereticus was in the sector. He was a man of logic and cold fire. He did not believe in miracles. He believed in unchecked psychers and warp trickery. He diverted his frigate, the Hammer of Truth, to Hylas Prime. He travelled with a retinue of stormtroopers and a single Grey Knight, a specialist in demon killing. Homelander was sitting in the governor's office, spinning a globe of Hylas Prime. He was bored. He heard the sonic boom of atmospheric entry. He looked up. He expected another attack. He flew out to meet it. He saw a black drop pod streak through the clouds. It was followed by a Thunderhawk gunship. The drop pod landed in the plaza, crushing the half-finished statue of Homelander. Dust billowed. Homelander landed 10 meters away. He was angry. That was his statue. The doors of the drop pod blew open with explosive bolts. 5 figures emerged. They were not human. They were space marines. But they were not the blue ones Homelander might have seen in a vague pop culture memory. These were clad in black power armor, adorned with purity seals and skulls. They were the Death Watch. They were veterans of 1,000 alien wars. They moved with a speed that defied their bulk. They raised their bolters. They didn't aim at the crowd. They aimed at Homelander. Inquisitor Kalen descended the ramp of the Thunderhawk that landed behind them. He wore a long leather coat over carapace armor. He carried a power sword and a bolt pistol. He had a rosette on his chest. He looked at Homelander. He did not bow. He did not smile. He adjusted his monocle. "Identify yourself," Kalen said. His voice was amplified by a voxcaster. It echoed off the buildings. "By the authority of the Holy Inquisition, I demand to know the nature of your existence." Homelander looked at the Inquisitor. He looked at the Space Marines. He saw the guns pointed at him. He felt the old insecurity rising. Who were these people to give him orders? He was the Homelander. "I'm the hero," Homelander said. He stepped forward. His eyes began to glow. "And you just broke my statue." The Space Marines did not flinch. They had faced Hive tyrants and demon princes. A man with glowing eyes was a Tuesday. The squad leader, a veteran named Sergeant Varus, clicked his vox. Target locked. High energy readings. Potential alpha-level psyker. Awaiting orders. Kalen studied Homelander. He saw the lack of corruption on the skin. He saw the perfect biological symmetry. But he also saw the arrogance. The Imperium tolerates arrogance only in the High Lords and the Astartes. In a stranger, arrogance is a sign of the enemy. "You are not a saint," Kalen said calmly. "A saint knows humility. A saint knows the Emperor. You are a Xenos breed or a warp spawn. Stand down and submit to testing, or be destroyed." Homelander laughed. He really laughed. "Destroyed? You and what army? These tin soldiers." He moved. He moved faster than the eye could follow. He closed the distance to the nearest space marine. He threw a punch. It connected with the marine's chest plate. The ceramite cracked. The marine was knocked back 10 feet, skidding on the stone. But the marine did not explode. He did not die. He grunted, planted his feet, and raised his bolter again. Homelander stopped. He was confused. That punch would have put a hole in a tank. The marine was still standing. The marine's physiology was designed to take punishment that would liquidate a normal human. The black carapace, the fused rib cage, the redundant organs, they absorbed the shock. "Contact," Sergeant Varys shouted. "Open fire." The bolters roared. These were not laser guns. These were mass-reactive explosive shells. They struck Homelander's chest, his face, his shoulders. They exploded on impact. The force staggered him. He felt pain. Not real damage, but pain. The concussive force knocked the wind out of him. Smoke obscured his vision. He covered his face. He was being shot. He was being hurt. He screamed. A beam of heat vision erupted from his eyes, wide and uncontrolled. It swept across the plaza. It melted the stone. It caught one of the space marines in the shoulder. The pauldron melted. The marine dropped to one knee, combat stimulants flooding his system. He did not scream. He kept firing one-handed. Kalen watched the display. He saw the heat vision. He analyzed the threat. Psychic capabilities confirmed. Biomancy, pyrokinesis, threat level extremis. Homelander flew up. He needed distance. He hovered 50 meters in the air, his suit smoking. He looked down at the squad. They were still tracking him. Their aim was perfect. He felt a sudden chill. These weren't like the police back home. These weren't like the terrorists. These things were professionals, and they weren't afraid of him. Governor Morros ran out onto the balcony. He screamed at the Inquisitor. "Stop! He is the savior. He saved the city." Kalen looked at the governor. "He is an unsanctioned abomination, Governor, and you will be executed for harboring him." Homelander heard this. He heard the threat. He realized that if the governor died, his food and shelter died. He realized he had no friends here. He looked at the Inquisitor. He made a choice. He did not choose the heroic path of de-escalation. He chose the path of dominance. He flew down at full speed. He did not aim for the Marines. He aimed for the Inquisitor. Kalen activated his refractor field. A shimmering bubble of energy surrounded him. Homelander slammed into the field. The impact cracked the stone beneath them. The field flared and failed. Kalen was thrown back. Homelander stood over him. He grabbed the Inquisitor by the throat. "I am not an abomination," Homelander hissed. "I am the Homelander, and I can do whatever I want." Sergeant Varys drew a power sword. The blade crackled with a disruption field that could split atoms. He charged Homelander's exposed back. Homelander heard the hum of the weapon. He spun around. He caught the blade. This was a mistake. The power field reacted with his skin. It burned. It cut. Homelander yelled and let go. He looked at his hand. There was a thin line of red blood. He was bleeding. He stared at the blood in disbelief. He had never bled. The sight of his own blood broke something in his mind. The carefully constructed narcissism fractured. Panic flooded in. He was mortal. He could be hurt. He lashed out in a frenzy. He kicked Varys. The sergeant flew into the drop pod, denting the hull. Homelander took off. He flew straight up. He broke the sound barrier. He kept going until he hit the upper atmosphere. He floated in the void, looking down at the planet. He was shaking. He was hyperventilating. Below him, on the surface, Inquisitor Kalen got to his feet. He rubbed his bruised throat. He looked at the sky. He tapped his Vox bead. Prepare a message for the Ordo Malleus. We have a confirmed Omega-level threat. And prepare the planetary defense batteries. If he comes back down, we turn the sky into fire. Moros watched the sky, weeping. He knew his days were numbered. The Savior had fled. The Inquisition was here. And in the darkness of space, the Ork fleet was getting closer. Homelander floated in the silence of orbit. He felt the cold. He looked at his hand. The cut had already healed, but the memory of the pain remained. He looked at the planet below. It was ugly. It was mean. It didn't love him. He hated it. But he had nowhere else to go. He saw the Ork ships approaching from the dark side of the moon. They were crude, massive scrap ships, leaking plasma and exhaust. They looked like garbage heaps with engines. Homelander wiped the tears from his eyes. He looked at the alien fleet. He needed to prove he was the best. He needed them to love him again. If he killed the monsters in space, the little men in black armor would have to apologize. They would have to build his statue again. He flew toward the Ork fleet. He did not know tactics. He did not know about void shields or point defense turrets. He only knew that he was the Homelander, and he was going to laser everything until it stopped moving. This was the end of the beginning. The arrival was over. The friction between the physics of a superhero universe and the metaphysics of the 41st millennium had begun. Homelander was a hammer looking for a nail. But in this universe, the nails fight back. The strategic log of Hylas Prime records this day as the day of the Force Dawn. It notes the expenditure of 400 bolter rounds. It notes the destruction of District 9. It notes the arrival of Entity Alpha. And it notes that for the first time in centuries, the governor prayed not for the Emperor's protection, but for the Emperor's forgiveness. The planet was now a chessboard, and the pieces were moving. Homelander was the queen, powerful and unrestricted, but he did not know the rules of the game. And the players on the other side of the board, the Chaos Gods, the Xenos Warlords, the High Lords of Terror, were starting to pay attention. The silence of space was broken by the roar of Ork engines. Homelander flew into the teeth of the Waaaghs with a smile that was more rictus than joy. He was going to be the hero, even if he had to kill every living thing in the system to prove it. The void war between Entity Alpha, designated locally as the Homelander, and the Ork freebooter fleet of Warboss Skartov began at 0600 hours planetary time. This engagement serves as a seminal case study in the danger of applying pre-imperial tactical logic to the reality of the 41st millennium. Homelander flew without a void suit, sustained by his aberrant biology, which seemingly negated the need for oxygen or pressure regulation. He approached the Ork fleet at Mach 20, a blue streak against the blackness of the Hylas system. His target was the lead vessel, a kill cruiser named the Gork's Boot. It was a conglomeration of rusted scrap, stolen asteroid mining equipment, and oversized thrusters roughly 4 kilometers in length. To Homelander, this was a familiar script. In his reality, alien invasions were solved by destroying the mothership. He assumed the vessel was fragile, constructed of standard alloys. He did not understand the Ork Waaaghs field, the psychic lubricant that allows impossibility to function as engineering. He did not understand void shields. He accelerated, intending to fly straight through the bridge of the command ship, severing the head of the snake. He extended his fists. He prepared a quip that no one in the vacuum could hear. He impacted the void shield at full velocity. The collision did not result in the destruction of the ship. It resulted in a discharge of energy equivalent to a tactical nuclear detonation. The void shield is a displacement field, shifting kinetic energy into the warp. When Homelander struck it, the universe rejected his intrusion. He was not stopped by a wall. He was stopped by a dimensional rejection. The feedback loop shattered the capillaries in his eyes. It ruptured his eardrums. He was flung backward into the void, tumbling end over end for 10 kilometers. He floated there, stunned, drifting in the silence. His nose was bleeding. His head rang with a sound like tearing metal. He looked at the ship. It was unharmed. A shimmering purple field rippled around it, mocking him. He felt a surge of confusion that quickly curdled into rage. In his world, things broke when he hit them. Why didn't this break? He screamed into the vacuum, a silent expulsion of air from his lungs. His eyes lit up with the intensity of twin stars. If he could not punch it, he would melt it. He unleashed his heat vision at maximum output. The beams of red energy traversed the distance instantly. They struck the void shield. The energy flared, painting the hull of the Ork ship in grotesque hues of violet and violet. Inside the Gork's boot, alarm klaxons, which were simply Gretchen hitting sheets of metal with wrenches, began to sound. Warboss Skat Tov sat on his command throne, eating a squig. He watched the view screen. It showed a tiny man thing floating outside, glowing red. The mech boys reported that the forward shields were fluctuating. The warboss laughed. He had expected a boarding torpedo or a Nova cannon. He had not expected a flying Humi. He keyed the Voxcaster for the entire fleet. He ordered them to squash the bug. The Ork fleet responded with the chaotic enthusiasm typical of the species. Hundreds of dorsal batteries, macro cannons, and looted defense lasers opened fire. The space around Homelander filled with flak. Mass reactive shells the size of cars detonated around him. Last fire seared the space where he had been a microsecond before. Homelander dodged. He was fast, faster than the targeting cogitators of the Orks. He wove through the barrage, his ego bruising with every near miss. They were shooting at him. They were trying to kill him. It felt disrespectful. He changed tactics. He flew toward one of the smaller escort ships, a frigate held together by rusty chains and faith. It lacked the heavy shielding of the cruiser. Homelander reached it in seconds. He did not punch it. He flew alongside the massive engines, glowing with dirty plasma. He targeted the fuel lines. He sliced them open with his eyes. The plasma vented. The engine went critical. The frigate detonated. The explosion was satisfying. A silent flower of fire and debris blossomed in the dark. Homelander smiled. That was how it was supposed to go. But then he saw the debris. The shrapnel from the explosion did not vanish. It accelerated. Chunks of hull plate slammed into the neighboring Ork ships. But instead of retreating, the Orks cheered. They loved the noise. They loved the destruction. The loss of a ship did not demoralize them. It excited them. They adjusted their course. They were not forming a defensive line. They were accelerating toward the planet. Homelander realized with a dawning horror that they were ignoring him. They were heading for the city below. The city where his statue was. The city that was his stage. He could not let them touch his things. He flew ahead of the fleet, positioning himself between the Gork's boot and the planet Hylas Prime. He hovered there, a speck against the swirling clouds of the world below. He held up his hand in a stop gesture. The Gork's boot weighed 30 million tons. It was moving at combat speed. The warboss saw the little blue man in front of his ship. He yelled for the mech boys to engage the ramming spikes. A massive, serrated prow extended from the front of the ship. Skartorf wanted to see what color the Humi pasted into. Homelander saw the ship coming. He braced himself. He believed in his own narrative. He was the strongest being in existence. He could lift an airplane. He could stop a train. Therefore, he could stop this. He planted his feet on nothing, using his flight ability to generate an opposing force. He caught the tip of the ramming spike. Physics in the 41st millennium is a harsh mistress. When an unstoppable force meets a movable object, the object moves. Homelander did not stop the ship. The ship accelerated him. He was pushed backward, his hands digging into the adamantium of the prow. He strained. The veins in his neck bulged. He screamed. He applied enough force to crack a tectonic plate. The metal of the ship's prow buckled and folded around him. He was buried in the metal, pushed deep into the nose of the vessel. But the ship did not stop. Its mass was too great. Its inertia was absolute. He was being driven backward toward the planet. The friction of atmospheric entry began to heat the hull. Homelander was trapped in the wreckage of the prow, pinned by millions of tons of Ork scrap. He felt the heat rise. He felt the vibration of the ship entering the stratosphere. He had failed to stop it. He had only become a hood ornament. The Gorg's boot entered the atmosphere of Hylas Prime at a steep angle. The heat shielding of the Ork ship was rudimentary. Layers of scrap metal burned away. Inside the prow, Homelander clawed his way free. He burst out of the metal, gasping for air that was thin and scorching. He looked down. The ground was rushing up to meet them. The ship was aiming for the primary Hive City. Homelander panicked. He flew to the side of the ship. He started lasering the hull, trying to cut the ship in half. He sliced through armor plates. He severed structural beams, but the ship was too big. It was like trying to cut down a redwood tree with a penknife. He flew to the engines at the rear. He destroyed one, then another. The ship listed. It began to roll, but it did not stop falling. Warboss Skartorf, realizing his ship was doomed, did the logical Ork thing. He aimed for the biggest building he could see. He aimed for the governor's palace. The impact occurred at 0642 hours. The Gorg's boot struck the eastern quadrant of Hive Primus. It did not hit the palace directly, thanks to Homelander's destruction of the port engines, but the difference was academic. The kinetic energy of the crash obliterated District 4, District 5, and the mercantile sector. A mushroom cloud of dust, pulverized concrete, and burning fuel rose 20 kilometers into the atmosphere. The shock wave circled the planet 3 times. 10 million citizens died in the first second. Another 20 million were buried in the collapse of the subspires. Homelander hovered in the smoke, 5,000 meters above the impact zone. He watched the devastation. He saw the firestorm consuming the city he had claimed. He saw the dust cloud swallowing the statue he had commissioned. He felt a strange hollowness. It wasn't grief. It was the realization that he had messed up the set. The audience was dead. In the bunker beneath the governor's palace, Inquisitor Kalen watched the tactical hololiths turn red. The seismic sensors registered a localized earthquake of magnitude 8. The Vox channels were a wall of static and screaming. Kalen dusted the plaster from his coat. The ceiling of the bunker had cracked. He looked at Governor Moros, who was curled in a fetal position under a tactical table, clutching a rosary. "The Xenos vessel has made planetfall," Kalen stated, his voice calm. "Estimating 90% casualties in the Eastern Hive. The defense grid is offline. The void shields are down." Sergeant Varus of the Death Watch checked his bolter. "And the entity?" "The flying man." "Unknown," Kalen said. "But if he survived, he is no longer a variable. He is a hostile combatant. He led the enemy to us. He failed to intercept. He's either incompetent or complicit. In the eyes of the Emperor, there is no difference. Kaelin turned to the comms officer. Signal the brother captain. Authorization Vermilion. We have a containment breach. And prepare the cyclonic torpedoes on the Hammer of Truth in orbit. If we cannot hold the ground, we burn the rock. On the surface, the wreckage of the Ork ship was a burning mountain of steel. But Orks are hard to kill. From the burning hulk, escape pods and drop rocks began to open. Green-skinned warriors, burned and angry, stumbled out of the fire. They roared. They began to shoot at the survivors. The invasion had not been stopped. It had simply been delivered via express shipping. Homelander descended slowly. He landed on a piece of ruined freeway overpass that overlooked the crater. He was covered in soot. His cape was torn. His blue suit was stained with black oil and green blood. He looked down at the carnage. He expected to see rescue workers. He expected to see news crews. Instead, he saw war. A regiment of the Planetary Defense Force, the Hylas 99th, was dug in on the other side of the crater. They were shelling the Ork crash site with Earthshaker cannons. They saw the figure land on the overpass. The commander of the 99th, a man who had just lost his family in the impact, looked through his macro binoculars. He saw the man who had provoked the Inquisition, the man who had flown into space and brought the ship down on their heads. Target identified, the commander whispered, his voice shaking with hate. The false saint. He did this. He brought them here. Orders, sir? Asked his lieutenant. Fire, the commander screamed. Fire everything. The Hylas 99th turned their heavy weapons towards the overpass. Hydras, basilisks, and las cannons unleashed a storm of ordnance. Homelander stood there, looking at his hands, trying to figure out how to spin this. He didn't hear the shells coming until the air pressure changed. The first shell landed at his feet. It was a high explosive round. The blast threw him backward. He crashed through a billboard. He stood up, ringing and furious. I'm on your side, he screamed. I tried to stop them. A Lascannon beam struck him in the chest. It burned a hole in his suit, scorching the skin. It hurt. It really hurt. Homelander looked at the soldiers. They were tiny, dirty little men. And they were hurting him. After everything he did. After he flew into space for them. The narcissist's injury is the most dangerous wound of all. It does not bleed. It festers. Homelander's mind, already fractured by the vacuum and the failure, finally snapped. He stopped seeing people. He stopped seeing an audience. He saw ants, ungrateful, biting ants. Fine, Homelander whispered. His eyes began to glow, not with the controlled red of a hero, but with the blinding white-hot intensity of a supernova. If you want to be the villains, be the villains. He took off. He did not fly up. He flew low. He broke the sound barrier at ground level. The sonic boom liquidated the organs of the soldiers in the front trench. He flew through the tank line. He didn't punch the tanks. He flew through them. He turned his body into a kinetic missile. Lehman Russ battle tanks were torn apart like wet tissue paper. He moved so fast he was a blur of motion. He ripped turrets off with his bare hands and threw them at incoming chimeras. He landed in the middle of the command squad. The commander drew his power sword. Homelander caught the blade. This time, he didn't care about the pain. He crushed the blade in his hand. He grabbed the commander by the neck. Why? Homelander screamed, spittle flying from his mouth. I am the only one who can save you. Why don't you love me? The commander, a veteran of 10 campaigns, spat blood in Homelander's face. Because you are a monster, he wheezed, and the Emperor protects. Homelander squeezed. The commander died. Homelander dropped the body. He looked around. The regiment was broken. The survivors were fleeing. He stood alone in the field of dead bodies. He was panting. He felt a surge of power. It felt good. It felt better than the applause. Fear was purer. Fear was honest. But the silence was interrupted, not by applause, but by a sound from the warp. The crash, the massive death toll, the despair, and now this act of supreme ego and slaughter. It had thinned the veil. The warp rift above the planet pulsed. The Chaos Gods were watching, and one of them leaned in close. It was not a voice in his ear. It was a reflection in a pool of spilled promethium oil. Homelander looked down. He saw his reflection, but the reflection wasn't bleeding. The reflection was perfect. The suit was gold, not blue. The cape was purple. The reflection smiled. They don't understand you. The reflection whispered inside his mind. They are small. They are broken. They resent your perfection. Homelander looked around. Who said that? I am the only one who sees you. The voice purred. It was liquid, silken, and terrifying. It sounded like Slanesh, the Prince of Pleasure, the Lord of Excess, but it also carried the twisting logic of Tzeentch. You wanted to be a hero, but they won't let you. They want a martyr. They want you to die for them. Is that what you want, John? To die for these ants? No, Homelander whispered. I'm the Homelander. I don't die. Then show them, the voice urged. Show them what you really are. You aren't a man. You are a god in waiting. But you are holding back. You are still trying to follow their rules. Break the rules. Take what is yours. Homelander looked at the burning city. He looked at the governor's palace in the distance, still standing amidst the ruin. He felt a new purpose. He didn't need to save them. He needed to rule them. If they wouldn't cheer, they would kneel. He launched himself into the air, heading for the palace. But the Imperium was not done. High in orbit, the Hammer of Truth maneuvered into position. Inquisitor Kalen had authorized the deployment of the Grey Knights. Teleportarium arrays began to cycle. On the ground near the palace, the air began to smell of ozone and sanctified oil. Reality distorted. 5 Terminators of the Grey Knights materialized. They were giants clad in silver armor, etched with runes of warding. They carried Nemesis force halberds and stormbolters loaded with Psy-cannon bolts. They were the Demon Slayers. They were the ultimate sanction. Brother Captain Arvon led them. He sensed the approach of the entity. He felt the psychic stench of the warp clinging to Homelander's soul. The entity was not a demon yet, but he was walking the eightfold path. Target incoming, Arvon spoke, his voice a grinder of stones. Prepare the rite of banishment. Do not engage in melee unless necessary. His physical strength rivals a bloodthirster. We must strike at his mind. Homelander saw the silver figures blocking his path to the palace. He slowed down. He learned his lesson with the black armor guys. These ones looked shinier, bigger. Get out of my way, Homelander shouted, hovering 20 meters away. I'm going to speak to the manager. Arvant raised his hand. He did not fire a weapon. He began to chant. The other 4 knights joined him. It was a chant in High Gothic, a ritual of abjuration. Abominatis, excommunicatis, malleus. The words hit Homelander like physical blows. He grabbed his head. He felt a splitting headache, a pressure behind his eyes. It wasn't physical pain. It was his soul being scoured. The Grey Knights were attacking the very warp essence that sustained his powers in this reality. Stop it, Homelander screamed. He fired his heat vision. The beam struck the Aegis armor of the knights. The runic wards flared, absorbing the energy. The knights did not stop chanting. Homelander fell to his knees in the air, then dropped to the ground. He vomited clear fluid. He felt weak. For the first time, he felt truly powerless. The chanting was cutting him off from his own strength. I am the Homelander, he wheezed, crawling forward. Arvin ceased the chant and leveled his storm bolter. You are nothing. You are a mistake of the ether. Be undone. He fired. The Psy-Cannon bolts were tipped with silver and inscribed with holy texts. They pierced Homelander's shoulder. They burned like holy water on a vampire. Homelander shrieked. It was a sound of pure indignity. He scrambled back, scrambling away on all fours like a wounded animal. He couldn't fight them. They were cheating. Magic words, silver bullets. It wasn't fair. He fled. He used his speed to run, not fly, disappearing into the ruins of the lower city. He ran until he found a sewer entrance. He tore the grate off and jumped in. The greatest superhero of his world was now hiding in the excrement of a Hive City, bleeding, crying, and hunted. In the darkness of the sewer, the voice returned. It was louder now. See, the voice soothed. They hate you. They hurt you. But I can make the pain go away. I can make you strong enough to crush the Silver Men. I can give you a legion that will never stop clapping. All you have to do is let me in. Homelander sat in the filth, clutching his bleeding shoulder. He looked into the dark water. He didn't see a monster anymore. He saw a way out. He saw a future where he won. Tell me, Homelander whispered to the dark. Tell me how to kill them all. And in the warp, the great game shifted. Tzeentch smiled at the ambition. Khorne grinned at the rage. But Slaanesh laughed, because a soul so obsessed with itself was the most delicious meal of all. Above, the Orks of Skartorf were rallying. They had looted the ruins of District 4 and were building a gargant from the wreckage of their own ship. The Grey Knights were hunting. The Inquisition was purging. The city was dying. But the true crisis had just begun. Homelander had stopped trying to be Superman. He was ready to become something else. He was ready to become the champion of the ego. The transition of the Hylas Prime conflict from a localized containment operation to a planetary insurrection began in the sumps of the tertiary hive levels. Inquisitorial records designate this period as the descent of the false idol. Homelander had fled the surface, bleeding and humiliated by the Grey Knights. He did not understand the nature of the weapons that had hurt him. He only understood that the surface world had rejected him. He descended into the darkness, past the manufactorum levels, past the worker habs, down into the chem tunnels, where the light of the Emperor never reached. The underhive of Hylas Prime was a biome of toxic sludge, rusted piping, and human misery. It was populated by mutants, runaway serfs, and the forgotten dregs of the Imperium. They lived in tribes, worshipping localized deities made of scrap metal or praying to the dark things that whispered in the water recyclers. Homelander fell into this world like a stone dropped into a cesspit. He landed in a pool of industrial runoff, gasping for air. His suit was torn. His cape was a rag. He sat there for hours, shivering not from cold but from shock. He was the Homelander. He was supposed to be in a tower. He was supposed to be clean. The local inhabitants found him eventually. A scavenging party of the Red Eyes tribe, mutants with photosensitive vision and scaly skin, approached him with serrated knives. They saw a man in a ruined blue suit. They saw meat. They did not see a god. They attacked with the desperation of starving animals. The first mutant lunged with a rusted shiv. Homelander did not even stand up. He backhanded the creature. The mutant's head was removed from its shoulders with such velocity that it cracked the concrete wall 10 meters away. The other 6 mutants froze. They looked at the dead body. They looked at the man. Homelander stood up slowly. His eyes glowed red. illuminating the damp, dripping tunnel. He was covered in filth. He smelled like sulfur and waste, but he smiled. It was a broken, terrifying smile. He asked them if they knew who he was. They did not speak Gothic well. They grunted. He stepped forward and lasered the legs off the leader. The man screamed. Homelander watched him bleed. He told them to kneel. They knelt. They did not kneel out of love. They knelt because the logic of the Underhive is simple. Power is authority. Violence is the only vote that counts. This was the spark. Homelander did not hide. He began to move through the Underhive with the momentum of a conqueror. He found the settlements of the outcasts. He found the hidden temples of the minor cults. He did not offer them salvation. He offered them revenge. He told them that the people in the spires hated them. This was true. He told them that he was the only one who cared. This was a lie, but Homelander believed it in the moment. He needed them to love him, so he acted the part of the liberator. Within 48 hours, he had amassed a following of 10,000 mutants and dregs. They called him the Starfather. They called him the Blue King. The Chaos Gods, sensing the shift in the metaphysical tides, began to pour energy into this new vessel. Slange fed on Homelander's need for adoration. Tzeentch fed on his desire to rewrite the reality of his defeat. Khorne simply enjoyed the impending slaughter. The whispers in Homelander's head became clearer. They gave him ideas. They told him that an army needed generals. They told him that a hero needed a team. Homelander established his headquarters in a derelict geothermal processing station deep in the sump. He sat on a throne made of welded pipes. He looked at his followers. They were ugly. They were deformed. He hated looking at them. He wanted his old team back. He wanted the Seven. The whispers suggested a solution. There were vats of unstable chemicals in the processing station. There was warp-tainted runoff from the city above. The voice told him that if they drank it, they would become like him. Homelander announced a tryout. He told the mutants that he would choose the best of them to be his new elite. He filled a vat with the glowing, toxic sludge. He added his own blood to it, cutting his hand with a piece of sharp debris. His blood hissed when it touched the chemicals. It turned the mixture a violent, vibrant blue. He ordered them to drink. Hundreds died. Their bodies could not handle the toxicity or the warp energy. They exploded. They melted. They turned into gibbering chaos spawn that had to be put down with heat vision. Homelander watched the carnage with indifference. He was casting. Casting was always a numbers game, but some survived. The warp energy latched onto their hatred and their genetic defects. One man, a brute with muscle hypertrophy, drank the mix and grew to 12 feet tall. His skin turned to rock-like scales. He lost the ability to speak, only able to growl. Homelander looked at him. He nodded. He named him Black Noir. Another survivor, a woman with third-degree burns across her face, found she could generate plasma from her hands. She screamed in constant pain as her flesh burned and regenerated. Homelander liked the aesthetic. He named her Stormfront. He built a team of 7 monsters. They were not heroes. They were parodies, twisted reflections of his shattered psyche. But they were powerful, and they obeyed him. On the surface, the strategic situation was deteriorating rapidly. Inquisitor Kalen had made a calculation based on standard Imperial doctrine. He assumed the entity had fled to die or hide. He prioritized the Ork threat. War boss Scar Tov had finished his Gargant. The massive machine named Dar Big Fist stood as tall as a hive spire. It was a walking cathedral of guns. It walked on tracked feet the size of city blocks. It belched black smoke. Its main gun was a stolen macro cannon from a crashed cruiser. The Orks launched a general offensive against the walls of Hive Primus. The Hylas 99th Regiment held the line, but they were running out of ammunition. The supply lines from the manufactorums were silent. This was the first sign of the chain reaction. The manufactorums were silent because the workers were gone. They had gone down. They had heard the rumors of the Blue King. They had abandoned their post to join the pilgrimage to the Underhive. General Harkin of the Hylas 99th stood in his command bunker. The wall maps were red. "Why are the heavy bolter shells not arriving?" he demanded. His quartermaster looked pale. "The factories in Sector 7 are empty, Lord General. The work crews have vanished. The servitors are standing idle. There is no one to load the convoys." Harkin slammed his fist on the table. "Vanished? To where?" "The deep, sir. Intelligence reports a mass migration. They say a savior has called them." At that moment, the seismic sensors triggered. It was not the rhythmic stomp of the Ork Gargant. It was a tremor coming from directly beneath the Hive City. The floor of the command bunker cracked. Homelander had grown tired of the dark. He had his army. He had his team. He was ready for the premiere. He did not take the elevators. He flew up the main ventilation shaft of the Hive, a column of air 10 kilometers wide. His army climbed the service ladders, the pipes, and the elevator cables. They swarmed like insects. Homelander burst from the ventilation shaft in the central plaza of the middle Hive. He was covered in grime, but his eyes were bright. He hovered above the hab blocks. Millions of citizens, cowering from the Ork bombardment, looked up. They saw him. He projected his voice, amplified by the warp sorcery he was unknowingly channeling. "I'm back," Homelander shouted. His voice shattered glass for miles. "I forgive you. I forgive you for losing faith. But now we are going to make this city safe again. My way." He did not fly to the walls to fight the Orks. He flew to the precinct fortress of the Adeptus Arbites. The judges of the Imperium were the symbols of the law that had rejected him. He landed in the courtyard of the fortress. The arbiters opened fire with shotguns and bolters. Homelander laughed. He motioned to his new team. The creature he named Black Noir charged. He smashed through the reinforced gates of the fortress. He tore arbiters in half with his rocky claws. The woman he named Stormfront unleashed torrents of plasma, melting the judges inside their carapace armor. It was a massacre. Homelander floated above it, watching the symbols of authority burn. He felt good. He felt like he was correcting a mistake. This tactical choice was the hinge upon which the fate of Hylas Prime turned. By attacking the internal security forces, Homelander decapitated the Order of the Hive. The PDF units on the wall heard that the city behind them was falling. Morale collapsed. Soldiers abandoned the walls to run home to protect their families from the mutant uprising. The defense grid faltered. War boss Scar Toph saw the guns on the wall go silent. He did not ask why. He slammed the levers of his Gargant forward. "The wall is sleeping. Smash it." The Gargant fired its macro cannon. The shell, the size of a drop pod, struck the primary gate of Hive Primus. The adamantium gates, which had stood for 3,000 years, were blown inward. The explosion killed 5,000 defenders. The dust cleared and the breach was open. A sea of green skin poured through. Orks in trucks, Orks on bikes, Orks on foot. They flooded the lower levels of the city. Now the Hive was a 3-layered kill box. The Orks were pushing in from the east. The Imperial Guard was trapped in the middle. Homelander's mutant army was pushing up from below. The chain reaction was complete. The strategic integrity of Hylas Prime was non-existent. Inquisitor Kalen watched the hololith dissolve into static. He was aboard the Hammer of Truth in low orbit, having shuttled up to coordinate the void strike. But now he realized the situation had evolved beyond a simple purge. "The city is lost," Kalen said. His voice was devoid of emotion. "The population is compromised. The defense is broken. The Xenos have breached the perimeter." Brother Captain Arvant of the Grey Knights stood beside him. "The entity is the catalyst. He must be destroyed. If he survives the fall of this world, he will become a beacon for every heretic in the sector. He is proving that the Imperium can be defied." "He is surrounded by thousands of worshippers," Kalen noted, "and the Orks are swarming the same zone. A bombardment will not confirm the kill. We need a surgical insertion. We need to cut the head off." Avan nodded. "My brothers are ready. We will teleport directly to his signature. We will not offer him a chance to surrender." Back on the surface, Homelander was holding court in the ruins of the Arbite's fortress. He was sitting on a pile of crushed helmets. He was giving a speech to a camera drone he had found. He was explaining that the judges were corrupt and that he had cleaned up the precinct. He was trying to frame the narrative. Suddenly, the air pressure dropped. The smell of ozone returned. Homelander stopped speaking. He knew that smell. He looked up. 5 columns of blue lightning struck the courtyard. The teleportation flare blinded the mutant army. When the light faded, 10 Grey Knights stood in a circle. They were not the squad he had fought before. These were Terminators. They wore tactical dreadnought armor, massive suits of ceramite that made them look like walking tanks. They carried thunder hammers and storm shields. They did not chant. They charged. Homelander screamed, "Get them! Kill them!" He pushed his Supes forward. The mutant he called the Deep, a fish-like abomination with razor claws, leapt at a Grey Knight. The Knight swung his thunder hammer. The blow connected with the mutant's chest. The Deep disintegrated in a spray of gore and bone. The kinetic force of the hammer was absolute. Homelander's army swarmed the Knights. Thousands of mutants threw themselves at the Terminators. They were cut down by storm bolters. They were crushed by power fists. But they were slowing the Knights down. The sheer mass of bodies was clogging the kill zone. Homelander saw his chance. He saw the leader, a Justiciar with a Nemesis Force sword. The Justiciar was distracted, ripping the head off the Black Noir creature. Homelander flew. He did not hold back. He hit the Justiciar at Mach 3. The impact was like a meteor strike. The Terminator armor held, but the Knight inside was rattled. They tumbled through the walls of the fortress, crashing into the street outside. Homelander pinned the Knight to the ground. He pounded on the helmet. He punched it again and again. His fists were blurring. He was screaming incoherently. The ceramite began to crack. The Grey Knight stabbed upward with his sword. The blade pierced Homelander's side. Homelander howled. He grabbed the sword blade with his bare hand. The energy field burned his flesh to the bone, but he didn't let go. He snapped the blade. He ripped the helmet off the Knight. He saw the face of the man inside. A scarred, stern warrior who looked at him with zero fear. "Die!" Homelander shrieked. He unleashed his heat vision point blank into the Knight's face. The Astartes died without a sound. Homelander stood up. He held the helmet. He was breathing heavily. He was bleeding from his side. His hand was a ruin of burnt meat. But he had killed one. He had killed one of the Silver Men. He looked up. The other Knights were fighting their way toward him. But then a shadow fell over the street. The Ork Gargant had arrived. The big fist rounded the corner of the hab block. It was a mountain of rust and guns. Its sensors detected the shiny silver men. It detected the blue flying boy. Warboss Scar Taof leaned out of the command deck of the Gargant. He used a massive loud hailer. "Oi, Bluey, you owe me a ship." The Gargant leveled its arms. One arm was a buzzsaw the size of a Ferris wheel. The other was a Gatling cannon that fired shells the size of motorbikes. Homelander looked at the Grey Knights. He looked at the Gargant. He looked at his dead Supes. He realized that the script had gone off the rails completely. This wasn't a hero story anymore. This was a battle royale. Fine, Homelander yelled at the sky. Everyone dies. Everyone. He flew at the Gargant. The Grey Knights fired at him. The Orks fired at the Grey Knights. The resulting crossfire vaporized the street. The strategic chain reaction had reached its peak. The governor of Hylas Prime, watching the destruction from his shuttle as he fled the planet, received a final transmission from the surface. It was not a request for help. It was a sound, the sound of a city screaming. The governor looked at the inquisitorial ship in orbit. He saw the launch bays of the Hammer of Truth open. He knew what was coming. The Inquisition had decided that the tactical situation was unrecoverable. They were not going to save the city. They were going to sterilize the wound. But Inquisitor Kalen hesitated. His finger hovered over the Exterminatus rune. He watched the energy readings from the surface. The entity, Homelander, was spiking. Every kill he made, every act of rage, was feeding the warp rift above the planet. If Kalen fired the cyclonic torpedoes now, the mass death might not close the rift. It might tear it wide open. A sacrifice of billions could summon a demon prince of Khorne. Hold fire, Kalen ordered. We cannot burn the planet yet. The ritual of blood is too close to completion. If we kill them all now, we give the enemy exactly what he wants. Then what do we do? The weapons officer asked. We let them fight, Kalen said. We let the Orks break the entity. Or we let the entity break the Orks. We wait for the dust to settle. And then we kill the winner. On the ground, Homelander was fighting a skyscraper-sized robot. He was dodging saw blades. He was melting armor plates. He was fast, but he was tired. And the Orks were having the time of their lives. They were cheering. They were chanting his name. Homelander! Homelander! Homelander heard it. He paused in midair. They were chanting his name. The Orks, the monsters. They were the only ones cheering. He looked at the green sea of faces. He felt a strange, sick connection. They were violent. They were simple. They loved a fight. They were his kind of people. A terrible idea formed in his shattered mind. Why fight them? Why try to save the humans who hated him? He flew up to the face of the Gargant. He hovered in front of the war boss. He didn't fire. He held up his hand. Hey, Homelander shouted. You want to smash the Silver Men? You want to smash the shiny ones? Skarta paused. He looked at the blue boy. He looked at the Grey Knight slaughtering his boys below. Yeah, I want to smash 'em good. Then follow me, Homelander said, his eyes glowing with madness. I'll lead you to the biggest fight in the universe. Homelander turned and flew toward the Grey Knights. He wasn't fighting the invasion anymore. He was leading it. The chain reaction was over. The explosion had begun. Homelander had just accidentally declared a Waaaghs. The slaughter in the plaza of St. Drusus was not a battle in the conventional sense. It was a physics equation where the variables were flesh, ceramite, and ego. The remaining Grey Knights, the elite Terminator squad led by Brother Captain Arvant, had formed a defensive circle around the wreckage of the Arbites fortress. They were the finest warriors of the Imperium. They fought with a coordination that was telepathic, their storm bolters weaving a curtain of explosive death that vaporized the first wave of Orks. But they were fighting two wars. They were fighting the physical mass of the Ork Waaaghs, a green tide that did not care about casualties. And they were fighting the psychological hurricane of Homelander. Homelander did not fight like a warrior. He fought like a force of nature. He utilized the Orks as ablative armor. When a Grey Knight leveled his halberd to strike, Homelander would grab an Ork knob and throw him into the blade. The Ork would die, impaled on the energy field, but the momentary distraction allowed Homelander to close the distance. He moved with a speed that blurred the air. He did not punch with technique. He punched with tantrums. He hammered on the tactical dreadnought armor of the Terminators until the adamantium fractured. He screamed as he fought, a continuous high-pitched shriek of grievance. He was yelling about his ratings. He was yelling about the lies. He was yelling that they should have loved him. Brother Captain Arvon was the last to fall. The Justicar had managed to sever Homelander's left ear with a glancing blow of his nemesis sword. The pain was blinding. Homelander touched the side of his head and felt the wetness of his own blood. The shock turned into a cold, crystallizing hate. Arvon stood amidst the bodies of his brothers, his armor smoking, his ammunition depleted. He raised his sword for a final duel. He did not speak. He did not offer a parley. He simply pointed the tip of the blade at Homelander's heart. Homelander hovered 10 feet off the ground. The Orks, sensing the climax, stopped shooting. They formed a rough circle, banging their choppers on their shields. They wanted to see the boss finish it. Homelander looked at the Space Marine. He saw the purity seals. He saw the unwavering discipline. It made him feel small, and Homelander could not tolerate feeling small. He did not engage in the duel. He did not fly down to fight sword to fist. That would be playing by the Knight's rules. Homelander looked at the ground beneath Arvon's feet. He focused his heat vision not on the Marine, but on the rock-crete foundation of the plaza. He cut a perfect circle around the Terminator. Then he flew underneath the plaza level, smashing through the sewers, and flew upward like a missile. He struck the slab of concrete from below. The impact launched Arvon and the ground he stood on 300 meters into the air. The Terminator was airborne, unable to maneuver. Homelander flew up to meet him. He grabbed the Marine by the ankles. He spun him around. He used the Space Marine as a club to smash into the side of the cathedral spire. The sound of the impact echoed across the city. The Terminator armor crumpled. Arvon died not in honorable combat, but as a ragdoll physics object. Homelander dropped the body. It fell to the plaza with a heavy, wet crash. The Orks roared. They fired their guns into the air. They did not understand the physics, but they understood that the shining man had been smashed. Warbus Skartov waddled over to Homelander. The massive Ork was bleeding from a dozen wounds, but he was grinning. He slapped Homelander on the back. The force of the blow would have broken a normal man's spine. Homelander stumbled forward, wincing. He turned to laser the Ork, but stopped. The Ork was looking at him with genuine admiration. It was the look Homelander had craved from the crowds. It was the look of a fan. "That was good crumpin'," Skartov bellowed. "You is tiny, but you hits like a squigoth." Homelander straightened his torn suit. He wiped the blood from his ear. He looked at the sea of green faces. They were ugly. They were monsters. But they were his. For the first time since arriving in this hellish dimension, he felt a sense of stability. He had a demographic. But the victory left a hollow taste. The Grey Knights were dead. The immediate threat was gone. And now the silence returned. The adrenaline faded, replaced by the throbbing pain in his ear and the burning in his hand where the power sword had cut him. He needed something to fix the feeling. He needed a win that felt like a win. This is where the small choice presented itself. It was not a choice of battle strategy. It was a choice of narrative. The planetary governor Moros had not died in the initial assault. During the chaos of the battle in the plaza, Moros and a small retinue of elites had managed to reach the private landing pad on the roof of the scorched governor's palace. They had a single Aquila lander, fueled and ready. Their plan was to launch, breach the atmosphere, and dock with the inquisitorial ship Hammer of Truth. Moros believed that if he could just reach the Inquisitor, he could explain. He could blame the PDF. He could blame the astropaths. He could survive. Homelander heard the engines of the lander ignite. His super hearing picked up the whine of the turbines amidst the roar of the burning city. He looked up. He saw the heat signature of the shuttle rising from the palace ruins. He could have let it go. The governor was insignificant, a fleeing bureaucrat. Stopping him served no tactical purpose. The city was already taken. The Orks were already looting. Letting Moros escape would simply mean one less mouth to feed, one less witness to kill. It would be the act of a soldier who considers the battle won. But Homelander was not a soldier. He was a product, and the product knew that you do not let the villain of the episode escape. In his twisted mind, Moros was the villain. Moros was the one who had failed to build the statue correctly. Moros was the one who had brought the bad news. Moros was the one who had stopped clapping first. Homelander flew up. He caught the lander at 5,000 feet. He did not destroy it. He grabbed the tail fin. He exerted his strength against the thrust of the engines. The metal groaned. The shuttle stalled in mid-air. Homelander dragged it back down. He did not land it gently. He threw it onto the roof of the palace. The landing gear collapsed. The fuel tanks ruptured but did not explode. Homelander ripped the door off the shuttle. He walked inside. Governor Moros was strapped into his crash seat, weeping. He held a data slate in his trembling hands. When he saw Homelander, he dropped the slate. "Please," Moros whispered. "I have authorization codes. I have wealth. I have off-world accounts in the Segmentum Solar. I can give you anything." Homelander stood in the doorway. The wind whipped his tattered cape. He looked at the governor. This was the moment. The choice. If Homelander accepted the offer, he would have resources. He could potentially negotiate. He could use the codes to access the planetary Vox grid and broadcast a message to the galaxy. He could try to spin the story. I saved the city from the governor's corruption. It was a path that led back to some semblance of order. It was the path of the rational actor. But then, Homelander saw his reflection in the dark glass of the shuttle window. He saw his severed ear. He saw the grime on his face. He saw the monster he was becoming. And he saw Moros looking at him not with love, not with admiration, but with pity. Moros made a fatal error. He tried to appeal to Homelander's better nature. "You are a man," Moros stammered. "You are not like the Xenos. You are a son of terror. Show mercy, and the Emperor may yet forgive." The mention of the Emperor was the spark. Homelander was sick of hearing about the Emperor. He was sick of the invisible dad everyone loved more than him. "I don't want forgiveness," Homelander said softly. "I want you to scream." He reached out and grabbed Moros by the face. He did not use his heat vision. He used his thumbs. He pressed slowly. He wanted it to last. He wanted to feel the life go out of the man who had failed him. Moros screamed. It was a long, jagged sound that tore through the thin air of the upper spire. It was a scream of absolute despair, the sound of a faithful servant realizing that his God was not coming to save him. And this was the massive outcome. In the Warhammer 40,000 universe, emotions are not abstract. They are energy. The warp is a reflection of the material realm. A single murder is nothing. But the murder of a planetary governor is significant. A governor is a conduit. They are sworn to the Golden Throne. Their soul is tethered to the Astronomicon by oaths of blood and faith. When Homelander killed Moros, he did not just kill a man, he broke a seal. But it was the way he killed him that mattered. He killed him with pure, distilled spite, not for war, not for survival, but for the sheer pleasure of inflicting pain to soothe his own ego. This resonance hit the warp like a dinner bell. High above the planet, the warp storm that had been brewing for weeks suddenly stopped swirling. It solidified. The colors shifted from the chaotic kaleidoscope of the unaligned Imperium to a specific, vibrant shade of purple and gold. Slaanesh, the Dark Prince of Chaos, accepts all excesses, but the excess of pride is a vintage delicacy. Homelander's act of petty, murderous vanity was the key that fit the lock of the Hylas system. The sky over Hylas Prime tore open. It wasn't a rift anymore. It was a mouth. Clouds of perfumed vapor descended, smelling of roses and rotting meat. The atmospheric pressure dropped so low that blood began to boil in the veins of the unprotected. On the bridge of the Hammer of Truth, the augur screamed. The ship's Geller field generator began to smoke. Geomantic instability detected, the Voidmaster shouted. The planetary soul binding has snapped. The governor is dead. Inquisitor Kalen grasped the railing. He looked at the main view screen. The planet below was changing. The continents were moving, not by plate tectonics, but like wax melting under a flame. He did it, Kalen whispered. The fool. He didn't just kill the governor. He broke the mandate of the system. Launch the cyclonic torpedoes, Kalen roared. Fire everything. Burn it all before it spreads. The weapons officer slammed the rune of firing. The Hammer of Truth shuddered as the massive torpedoes, designed to crack the crust of a world and ignite the atmosphere, dropped from the launch bays. They streaked toward the planet. They were the ultimate sanction, the eraser. Homelander stood on the roof of the palace, holding the limp body of the governor. He felt the shift in the air. He felt a sudden rush of euphoria, stronger than any drug, stronger than any applause. His pain vanished. His severed ear began to regrow, but it didn't grow back as skin. It grew back as a crystalline structure, hard and beautiful. He looked up and saw the torpedoes falling. He saw the fire trailing behind them. He knew instinctively what they were. They were the end of the show. No, Homelander said. He didn't scream it. He stated it. I'm not done. He didn't fly up to stop them. He didn't need to. The voice in his head, which had been a whisper, was now a chorus. It spoke with his own voice. You don't need to lift them, John. You just need to want them to stop. Homelander reached out his hand. He channeled the new energy surging through him. It was the power of the warp, flowing freely through the dam he had just broken. Purple lightning erupted from his fingertips. It wasn't electricity. It was raw change. The bolt struck the falling torpedoes. The torpedoes did not explode. They changed. The adamantium casings turned into glass. The fusion warheads turned into bouquets of screaming flowers. The death machines of the Imperium dissolved into a rain of petals and confetti. The confetti rained down on the burning city. It fell on the Orks, who paused their looting to catch the paper in their mouths. It fell on the corpses of the Grey Knights. Homelander looked at his hand. He looked at the purple lightning coiling around his fingers. He laughed. It started as a chuckle, then grew into a belly laugh, and finally into a maniacal cackle that was broadcast psychically to every living mind on the planet. The Orks on the ground heard the laugh. It resonated with their own madness. They looked up at the palace. The war boss, Skartov, felt the Waaaghs energy shift. It wasn't just green anymore. It was purple. It was sneaky. It was fast. Da blue boy is da boss, Skartov roared. He turned the boom rocks into party bits. The Orks cheered. But this wasn't a normal Waaaghs. The spores of the Orks were reacting to the warp saturation. Their skin began to darken. Their muscles became leaner, faster. They were mutating into something new, something chaotic. In orbit, the Hammer of Truth was in trouble. The destruction of the torpedoes was an impossibility. Weapon failure, the officer reported, his voice trembling. Transmutation of ordnance. Inquisitor, we are reading a localized reality collapse. The planet it's pulling us in. Gravity had inverted. The massive inquisitorial cruiser, kilometers long, was being dragged down not by mass, but by desire. The planet wanted the ship. Homelander wanted the ship. Kalen realized the tactical situation had shifted from containment to survival. Emergency warp jump, he ordered. Get us out of the system. Now. We are too deep in the gravity well. Do it, Kalen screamed. Blind jump. Anywhere but here. The navigator of the Hammer of Truth tore the veil open. The ship engaged its warp engines, but they were too close to the anomaly. As the ship tore a hole in reality to escape, it dragged a piece of the Hyla system with it. The ship vanished into the Imperium, heavily damaged, leaving the system to its fate. Homelander watched the starship disappear. He was disappointed. He wanted to play with it. But then he looked down at the city. It was his, truly his. The laws of physics no longer applied. He could fly as fast as he wanted. He could shape the stone with his thoughts. He could make them love him. He walked to the edge of the roof. He looked down at the courtyard where the Orks were gathered. He raised his arms. I am the Homelander, he bellowed. The sound was not carried by air but by the ether. It echoed in the souls of the survivors. And I can do whatever the fuck I want. The outcome of his choice to murder the governor was absolute. The Hyla system had been designated a demon world. The administrative status of the planet changed in the archives of Terra from contested to perdita. But the most dangerous change was in Homelander himself. He was no longer a Supe. He was a champion. The Chaos Gods had not just given him power, they had given him a purpose. He was to be the avatar of narcissism. The change began to manifest physically. His suit, once a fabric weave, began to fuse with his skin. The blue deepened into the color of a bruised sky. The eagles on his shoulders twisted into screaming demon faces. His cape regenerated, not as cloth, but as a membrane of shadow and blood. He felt the presence of the other beings in the warp. He felt Angron's rage. He felt Mortarian's despair. And he felt a challenge. They were the big dogs. He was the new arrival. They think they're better than me, Homelander whispered to the wind. I'll show them. I'll show them all. He turned to the Orks. Build it, he ordered. Build my tower. Make it taller. I want to see the stars. The Orks, now infused with the manic energy of Slanesh and Tzeentch, began to work. They didn't build with scrap anymore. They built with the bones of the city. They built with the physics-defying logic of the warp. The Hyla system had ceased to exist in real space. It was now a blister on the skin of the Imperium, a localized overlap where the laws of physics bowed to the laws of drama. The planet Hylas Prime spun on an axis of pure vanity. The atmosphere had turned a deep, bruised violet. The oceans had receded, replaced by flat, reflective plains of mercury that mirrored the sky. In the center of the ruined Hive City, a tower rose. It was not built of stone or steel. It was built of fused bone and glass, a spire that stretched past the stratosphere, defying gravity through the sheer willpower of its architect. Homelander sat at the apex of this impossible needle. He had changed. The blue suit was no longer synthetic weave. It was a carapace of living necrodermis and warp flesh. pulse beating with a dark bioluminescence. His cape was a shadow that bled into the air around him. His hair was perfect, frozen in a golden coiffure that did not move in the screaming winds of the warp. He sat on a throne made from the melted armor of the Grey Knights, looking out at his kingdom. Below him, millions of orcs and mutants marched in perfect choreographed geometric patterns. They did not fight. They did not loot. They chanted. They chanted a single syllable that resonated with the heartbeat of the planet. Me, 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 me. But Homelander was bored. The boredom was a physical ache, a rot in his gut. He had won. He had killed the governor. He had broken the Space Marines. He had bent reality. And yet, there were no cameras. There were no ratings. The Orks worshipped him, but their adoration was crude. It lacked the nuanced flavor of fear and love that he craved from humanity. He was a god in a box, and the box was getting small. The strategic stagnation of the Hylas sector was broken not by a raid, but by a crusade. The Imperium of man is a slow beast. It takes decades to turn its head, but when it bites with the force of a collapsing star. The astropathic screams of Governor Moros had not just reached the subsector. They had reached the Segmentum Command. The declaration of a demon world in a vital trade route triggered a response code Vermilion. The High Lords of Terror did not send the guard. They did not send a standard chapter. They sent the erasers. The sky above Hylas Prime did not break. It shattered. The violet clouds were scoured away by a wall of golden fire. The Indomitus Crusade battle group Sanctus Irae translated from the warp at the edge of the system. It was not a fleet. It was a migration. 4 battle barges, 20 strike cruisers, 50 escort frigates, and at the center, the massive bulk of the Daedalus crater, the flagship of the Minotaur's chapter. Homelander looked up. His super senses picked up the displacement of air as millions of tons of metal entered the gravity well. He stood up from his throne. A smile cracked his porcelain face. Finally, the audience had arrived. He flew up to meet them. He expected a challenge. He expected a champion to float out and give a speech. He prepared his opening line. He smoothed his cape. The Imperium did not send a champion. It sent a grid coordinate solution. The fleet opened fire. This was not the suppression fire of the local PDF. This was a planetary bombardment designed to crack tectonic plates. Macro cannons the size of skyscrapers fired shells the weight of trains. Lance batteries stripped the atmosphere in sheets of plasma. Cyclonic torpedoes began their descent. Homelander hovered in the upper atmosphere, and for the first time in his existence, he felt small. The sheer scale of the volley was incomprehensible. He lasered a shell. It exploded. He punched a torpedo. It detonated. He flew through a lance beam, screaming as it burned his warp-infused skin. But for every projectile he stopped, 10,000 more passed him. He turned to look at his tower. He watched as a magma bomb struck the base of his glass needle. The tower did not fall. It vaporized. The explosion swallowed his throne. It swallowed the central plaza. It swallowed the millions of chanting orcs. Homelander screamed. It was a sound of pure petulance. They were breaking his toys. He flew toward the lead ship, the Daedalus crater. He moved at a speed that turned him into a relativistic projectile. He smashed through the void shields, the feedback flaying his mind. He smashed through the adamantium prow. He tore into the gun decks. Inside the ship, he was a whirlwind of red heat and blue death. He liquefied crewmen. He tore bulkheads apart. He severed the plasma conduits. The ship began to list. He felt powerful again. He could break them. But then, the boarding torpedoes launched, not at him, at the planet. Hundreds of assault rams streaked toward the surface. The Minotaurs were not interested in a void war. They were here to kill the king. They ignored the damage to their own ship. They ignored the casualties. They were the Minotaurs. They spent lives like ammunition. Homelander saw the pods falling toward the ruins of his city. He realized that if they landed, they would kill the survivors. They would kill his last worshippers. If his worshippers died, the silence would return, and he could not bear the silence. He abandoned the attack on the ship. He turned and flew back down, chasing the drop pods. He was faster than gravity. He intercepted one, ripping the hull open and laser-eyeing the space marines inside. But there were too many. The pods slammed into the Mercury planes. The ramps dropped. The Minotaurs deployed. They were clad in bronze and red. They carried heavy bolters, assault cannons, and relic blades. They did not shout battle cries. They did not chant for the Emperor. They advanced in a wall of silence and violence. At the center of the formation stood Asterion Moloch, the chapter master of the Minotaurs. He was a giant even among Astartes. His Terminator armor was a masterwork of artificer engineering, adorned with the heraldry of the High Lords. He carried the Black Spear, a weapon of unknown origin, rumored to be from the Dark Age of technology. He held a storm shield etched with the history of dead rebellions. Homelander landed in front of the formation. The impact cracked the glass plane. He stood up, eyes glowing with the power of a birthing star. He looked at Moloch. "You came to my house," Homelander hissed, his voice amplified by the warp. "You broke my statue." Moloch did not speak. He did not remove his helmet. He simply pointed the Black Spear at Homelander's chest. The Minotaurs opened fire. The volume of fire was absolute. Thousands of bolter rounds struck Homelander every second. Even his invulnerability had limits. The sheer kinetic energy pushed him back. The explosive mass-reactive shells chipped away at his bio-armor. He raised his arms to shield his face. He walked forward against the storm. "Stop it," Homelander yelled. He unleashed a wave of heat vision. It swept across the front rank of the Minotaurs. Ceramite melted, flesh boiled. 10 Astartes died instantly. The line did not waver. The Minotaurs stepped over their dead brothers and kept firing. Homelander charged. He hit the line like a bowling ball. He grabbed a Marine and tore him in half. He punched a dreadnought, shattering its sarcophagus. He was winning the melee. He was the strongest thing on the field. Then Asterion Moloch moved. The chapter master did not move with the speed of a superhero. He moved with the precision of a guillotine. He stepped inside Homelander's wild haymaker. He slammed the edge of his storm shield into the Homelander's throat. The blow crushed the windpipe. Homelander gagged, stumbling back. Moloch thrust the Black Spear. The weapon was wreathed in a disruption field that unraveled matter at the atomic level. It pierced Homelander's chest. It went through the S-shield. It went through the ribs. It erupted from his back. Homelander gasped. He looked down at the black shaft of metal in his chest. He couldn't believe it. He was the Homelander. Moloch twisted the spear. A pulse of energy surged through Homelander's nervous system, paralyzing him. Moloch lifted him into the air, impaled on the weapon. The chapter master walked toward the edge of a crater, holding the writhing demigod aloft like a trophy. Homelander clawed at the spear. His strength was failing. The connection to the warp was flickering. The pain was unbearable, but worse than the pain was the humiliation. He was being manhandled. He was being beaten by a man in a bucket. I can do whatever I want, Homelander wheezed, blood bubbling on his lips. Moloch slammed him into the ground. He placed a heavy boot on Homelander's neck. He raised the spear for a final decapitating strike. Time seemed to freeze. The roar of the battle faded. The sky darkened. A voice spoke. It did not come from the Minotaur. It came from the shadow of Homelander's own cape. It came from the reflection in the mercury pool. "Look at you," the voice purred. It was a voice of silk and razors. So strong, so beautiful, and yet so finite. Homelander couldn't move his head. His eyes darted to the side. A figure shimmered into existence near the crater. It was not a space marine. It was a creature of lithe grace, wearing armor that offended the eye with its perfection. A herald of Slaanesh. "Help me," Homelander whispered. "Help you?" The herald laughed. "Why? You are dying, John. You played the game and you lost. The Corpse Emperor's dog has you pinned." The herald walked closer, stepping delicately over the corpses of the Minotaurs. The Space Marines did not seem to see him, or perhaps the entity existed in the split second between their synapses. "But," the herald continued, "there is an alternative. You see, the Dark Prince has been watching your reruns. He finds your ego delicious. He offers you a contract renewal." Moloch drove the spear down. Homelander caught the blade with his bare hands. The edge cut into his palms. He held it inches from his throat. His arms trembled. What does he want?" Homelander gritted out. "Everything," the herald said. "He wants the one thing you have never given anyone. He wants your submission, not to these mortals, but to him. Pledge your soul to the Prince of Pleasure. Become his avatar, and you will never die. You will never be forgotten. You will have an audience that screams your name for eternity." Homelander looked at Moloch's visor. He saw his own reflection. He looked like a beaten animal. He looked weak. He hated it. "And if I say no, then the spear goes down, the lights go out, and you are nothing, just another statistic in a universe that doesn't care." The spear inching closer. The disruption field burning his neck. Homelander felt the cold creeping into his heart. He thought about the darkness. He thought about being nothing. He couldn't do it. He couldn't be nothing. "I am the Homelander," he whispered, "and I don't die." "Say it," the herald urged. "Say his name." Homelander looked directly into the red lenses of the Minotaur. His eyes began to burn with a new, violet fire. "Slaanesh," Homelander screamed. "I am yours." The unavoidable offer was accepted. The strategic reality of the battlefield shifted instantly. The black spear did not pierce his throat. It shattered. A shockwave of psychic energy erupted from Homelander's body. It threw Asterion Moloch backwards. It threw the Minotaurs backward. It cracked the continental shelf of Hylas Prime. Homelander rose. He did not stand up. He unfolded. The flesh of his body split open, revealing a new form beneath. He grew. He elongated. His blue suit became a part of his physiology, a skin of shifting, screaming faces. Wings of pure, crystalline light burst from his shoulders. Not angel wings, but sharp, jagged constructs of hard light that cut the air. He was no longer a man. He was a demon prince. The sky tore open. The battle group in orbit ceased firing as the sensors were blinded by the psychic backlash. A warp storm of apocalyptic magnitude engulfed the Hylas system. Homelander floated above the crater. He looked at his hands. There were claws of gold and amethyst. He felt the power of a god coursing through him. He felt the gaze of Slaanesh. It was a heavy, suffocating weight, a collar of diamond and lead. He was powerful, yes, but he was owned. He didn't care. He was alive. He was beautiful. He looked down at Asterion Moloch. The chapter master was getting to his feet, his armor battered, his spear broken. Moloch looked up at the demon prince. He did not show fear. He activated the teleport Homer on his belt. Target lost. Moloch's voice grated over the Vox, the first words he had spoken. Exterminatus protocols failed. The system is condemned. The Minotaurs began to teleport away in flashes of golden light. They were leaving. They knew when a fight had become a natural disaster. "Don't you walk away from me," Homelander roared. His voice was a hurricane. "I am talking to you." He unleashed a beam of energy from his eyes. It was not heat vision. It was a beam of pure sensory overload. It struck the ground where the Minotaurs had been, but they were gone. Homelander was alone on the plains of Mercury. The Imperium was retreating. He had won. But as the adrenaline faded, he felt the tug of the leash. The herald stood beside him, smiling. "Beautiful," the herald said. "Truly magnificent. The prince is pleased." "I drove them off," Homelander said, flexing his new claws. "I am the king of this world." "You are the prince of this world," the herald corrected gently. "The king sits in the warp, and he has a schedule for you. There are other worlds to burn, other audiences to captivate." Homelander looked at the herald. He wanted to laser him. He wanted to tear him apart. But he couldn't. His body locked up. His new master would not allow it. The realization hit him with the force of a thunderhammer. He had traded a physical cage for a spiritual one. He was the strongest puppet in the universe, but he was still a puppet. Where do we go?" Homelander asked, his voice hollow. "To the Eye of Terror," the herald said. "The great game awaits. And you, my dear Homelander, are the new piece on the board." Homelander looked up at the violet sky. He saw the stars. They looked like millions of eyes watching him. He smiled. It was a rictus of madness and vanity. "Fine," Homelander said. "Let them watch." He spread his wings of hard light. He took off, shattering the sound barrier, flying upward into the warp storm that swirled like a spotlight waiting for its star. The planet Hylas Prime began to dissolve, pulled into the Imperium along with him, a permanent monument to the man who would burn the galaxy just to see his reflection in the flames. The administrative deletion of the Hylas system took longer than its military conquest. In the vast parchment-filled halls of the Administratum on Terra, scribes spent 3 years scrubbing the coordinates of Hylas Prime from the merchant charts. The trade routes were redrawn. The tithe grades were annulled. The regiment of the Hylas 99th, those few companies that had been off-world during the catastrophe, were sterilized and repurposed into penal legions for the Ghoul Stars campaigns. The Imperium does not mourn failures. It redacts them. The loss of the system was categorized as a navigational hazard, a sudden expansion of the cicatrix maledictum. The name Homelander was added to the Ordo Malleus tome of true names, a book bound in human skin that is read by fewer than 10 living souls per century. To speak his name is now a heresy punishable by arco-flagellation. To know his face is a sentence of death. In the void where the planet once spun, there is now only a swirling violet bruise in the fabric of reality. Navigator houses forbid their ships from translating near the anomaly. They call it the vanity trap. Astropaths who listen too closely to the psychic currents of that sector report hearing a sound that drives them to claw out their own eardrums. It is not the sound of war. It is the sound of applause. It is a wet, thundering, unending applause that sounds like meat slapping against stone. It is the laughter of the Dark Prince, echoing forever in the cold silence between stars. Inside the anomaly, time has no meaning. The demon prince known as the Narcissist sits upon a throne that pierces the clouds of a world formed from his own delusions. The tower is infinite, built of mirrors that reflect only his best angles. The population of this demon world consists of the souls of the Hyla citizenry, trapped in an eternal cycle of adoration. They do not eat, they do not sleep. They stand in the plazas of the glass city, their eyes sewn open, forced to watch the sky. Every day the prince flies. He streaks through the warp-stained clouds, leaving trails of hard light. He performs feats of strength, lifting mountains and crushing phantom armies. And every time he lands, the souls must cheer. If they stop, he burns them. If they cheer too loudly, he burns them for stealing focus. Homelander believes he has won. He believes he has finally found a demographic that respects him. He does not understand that he is the prisoner. He is the jester in the court of Slaanesh. The Dark Prince feeds on Homelander's insecurity, on the bottomless pit of his need. Every cheer fills him for a moment, but the hunger returns instantly, sharper and more painful than before. He is a god who is starving to death while seated at a banquet. He scans the horizon of the warp, looking for cameras, looking for ratings, looking for a love that does not exist in the 41st millennium. Occasionally, a lost ship exits the warp too close to his domain. The prince descends upon them with a smile that splits his face. He rips the hulls open not to kill, but to perform. He demands the crew watch him. He recites speeches about liberty and protection while he flays them alive. He asks them if they are surprised. He asks them if they like him. And when they die, screaming in the vacuum, he feels a flicker of annoyance that they cancelled their subscription so early. In the archives of the Inquisition, the final report on the Hylas incident is sealed with a rune of absolute containment. The concluding thought is written in the hand of Inquisitor Kalen, recorded moments before his own execution for failing to contain the threat. It serves as a warning to any who would seek to understand the entity. It reads simply that the greatest threat to the Imperium is not the alien, the mutant, or the heretic. It is the man who believes he is the protagonist of history. For in the grim darkness of the far future, there are no heroes. There is only war and the laughter of thirsting gods who are always watching and who always enjoy a good show. The broadcast has no end. The ratings are eternal, and the Homelander screams into the void, begging for one more encore.